I was born into a perfect family legacy until I uncovered a dark secret no one wanted revealed. Betrayal, threats, and a fight to protect the truth nearly destroyed everything I loved. But I chose to expose the lies, risking it all for justice and freedom. I want to share my story with you. I grew up inside walls gilded so brightly they blinded anyone who dared peek behind them. My family name was whispered with reverence at charity galas and engraved on the pillars of museums we'd funded. Babies born in my hometown were practically baptized into our legacy, our crest displayed on banners from the town square to the infant nursery. We were the shining example of success, philanthropic devotion, and moral rectitude. I, the son of our patriarch and matriarch, learned young that every smile I flashed, every courteous bow I made, had to be flawless or I risked shattering the illusion that fed our wealth and influence. Driving past our mansion's wrought iron gates each day felt like entering a stage set. The corridors echoed with polite laughter and hushed admiration for my parents' generous donations. I could feel every eye on me, expecting the perfect scion to carry our dynasty forward. Friends marveled at my poise, neighbors envied our vacations in exotic locales. I attended the finest schools, wore tailored suits, and recited polished speeches at foundation dinners. And yet, under the spotlights and camera flashes, I felt hollow, an actor trapped in a role I had never auditioned for. My mother mastered the art of gracious hospitality. In the drawing room, she poured vintage wine while cooing over homeless shelters she'd bankroll next. My father regaled board members with anecdotes of his humble beginnings, downplaying the sprawling estates and private jets that followed. They painted a narrative so captivating it obscured any trace of what lay buried beneath their polished veneer. I watched their performances each night, wearing a tuxedo that felt heavier than any chain. I wondered how long I could keep pretending. Behind closed doors, though, the perfection unraveled. The servants referred to me as master, their voices low and respectful, but I heard the contempt in their whispers. They knew there was more to our story than the brochures proclaimed. My parents' glances were never warm, they were calculating, as if measuring my worth against some unspoken standard. If I stumbled, they would not hesitate to remind me of every opportunity they'd given me. They reminded me that disgrace was not an abstract concept, but a threat they could unleash at any moment. Even the opulent family dinners felt hollow. As we sipped soup in the candlelit dining hall, my parents exchanged knowing looks before complimenting some distant relative who'd never darkened our doorstep. They brought out rare dishes and talked politics with such assured authority it made my stomach churn. I forced polite laughter at their jokes, careful not to let a flicker of doubt escape my lips. Because doubt was more dangerous than any weapon they might use against me. At night, I often wandered the corridors alone, tracing my fingertips over our family portrait gallery. The eyes of ancestors who'd supposedly built our fortune stared down, their painted smiles as bland as wax. In their mouths were stories untold, sins unconfessed, legacies buried like bodies in shallow graves. A knot of fear and longing twisted inside me. I wanted to be part of this grandeur, but I wanted out more desperately. My room, lavish as it was, felt like a prison cell carved from marble. I remembered the first time I dared question my place in this spectacle. I was 9, opening a gift from a local charity on our doorstep, a teddy bear stitched by children our foundation claimed to help. I hugged the bear and asked my mother if the children really got enough to eat. She smiled and told me sweetly that philanthropy required discretion and sometimes difficult choices. She patted my head and turned back to hosting. The message was clear: curiosity had no place here. Now I'm 27 with a wife and a daughter I adore. I built a life of my own outside those gilded halls, studied history, wrote articles, even joined a small nonprofit far from our family's orbit. But every time I return home for a wedding or a gala, that old unease claws at me. I'm still drenched in the family name, tethered to their expectations. I hear whispers. Who am I to challenge them, the ultimate paragons of virtue? Deep down, I know it's only a matter of time before the walls of this polished cage crack completely, revealing the rot I've spent my life pretending not to see. I hadn't intended to dive back into the family archives, but when Mom asked me to help organize the library's vaulted cabinet, just a quick favor, she said, I couldn't refuse. The room smelled of aged paper and polishing wax, each shelf lined with leather-bound journals, dusty portfolios, and gilt-edged albums that charted our family's century-long rise. She left me alone with the lantern's soft glow while she went to prepare tea downstairs. The silence pressed against my ears, broken only by the tick of a clock so old it might have witnessed my grandfather's first handshake that launched the family fortune. I began with a stack of yellowed ledgers from the early 1920s. Pages upon pages of figures recorded in precise handwriting, profits from textile mills, loans to farming ventures, donations to orphanages. Every entry under father's grandfather's name reinforced the myth of a self-made man. But as I flipped through the final volume, an entry caught my eye. A withdrawal of $20,000 marked sample purchase Montana, dated exactly 1 month after the supposed founding of our textile empire. Curious, I cross-referenced it with the ledger before and after. There was no note of suppliers, no indication of what was bought, and no follow-up transaction showing income from any goods sold. It simply appeared and disappeared like a ghost expense. My pulse quickened. I convinced myself it was a clerical error until the corner of a photograph peeped out beneath the ledger's binding. I tugged it free. The black and white image showed a group of wiry men in overalls standing in front of a loading dock. In the center, unmistakable despite the years of wear, was my great-grandfather, but he looked different. His hair was longer, his face gaunt, his hands raw and calloused. The backdrop wasn't a textile mill. It was a warehouse with crates labeled Northern Freight Co., a company I'd never heard associated with our name. I set the photo aside and rifled through the pile until I discovered an envelope sealed with red wax. The seal bore the family crest, but the envelope itself was unmarked. Inside was a letter written in ink so faded it threatened to vanish as I read. The first line sank into my chest like an ice pick. You may think you built this fortune with honest thread, but that spool began with blood. The handwriting was rushed, almost trembling, and the letter warned of someone who had been eliminated when they grew too talkative about the Montana shipment. It ended with a line I couldn't shake. One day, a loose thread will unravel everything. My breath came in shallow bursts. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my racing heart. How could this be real? Why had no one ever mentioned it? My parents had recounted every triumph, every philanthropic success, but never an unmarked withdrawal or a shady warehouse. Had they purposely concealed the truth? I replaced the letter and photo, my mind whirling. Why leave them here, hidden but not destroyed? I searched for more clues. In a locked drawer, I found blueprints of that Northern Freight Co. warehouse. The date scrawled in pencil matched the photo, 1922. Next to it lay correspondence between my great-grandfather and someone named RM. Letters spoke in veiled terms about assets, removal of liabilities, and timing the shipment to avoid witnesses. It was a clandestine world I'd never been taught existed. My stomach twisted in knots. If these documents were authentic, they proved our family's empire began not with honest trade, but with something far darker. A sudden creak on the landing pulled me from my shock. My mother appeared in the doorway, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. "Find something interesting?" she asked, crossing her arms. My heartbeat thudded painfully. I held my tongue. "Just sorting these," I said, lifting the ledgers as if they were innocent schoolbooks. She nodded but didn't move closer. "Be careful, some records aren't meant for casual perusal." The warning hung heavy in the air. I closed the cabinet and followed her downstairs, every step a hammer blow in my head. Over tea, she asked about the archives project, and I replied with vague reassurances. But inside, I was a storm of questions. Why had she warned me off? What had she known? The photograph in that letter represented more than a shady business deal. They signaled a foundational lie that could crumble the world I'd always believed in. And if my parents had covered it up, what else had they buried? That night, I lay awake listening to my daughter's soft breathing in the next room. The love I felt for her made the choice clear. I had to pull at that loose thread. I had to know how deep the rot ran, even if it meant unleashing a reckoning that would consume everything I'd ever known. I drifted into a restless sleep with the image of my great-grandfather's gaunt face burning behind my eyelids, a silent reminder that some secrets refuse to stay buried. I started my investigation in the quiet hours before dawn, slipping out of bed with a notebook clutched in one hand and my flashlight in the other. My wife thought I was still asleep when I tiptoed past her. In the garage, I dusted off my grandfather's old leather briefcase, the one he left behind when he retired. Inside, I found a portable scanner and a stack of blank flash drives. If I was going to document the truth, I needed to gather every shred of evidence without alerting my parents. First stop was the county courthouse, where I spent a day poring over public records for Northern Freight Co. Incorporation documents from 1921 showed the company listed a different president, one RM Mitchell, a man who vanished from the record books shortly after the Montana shipment. I cross-checked death certificates and found an entry for a Robert Mitchell, who supposedly died in a mining accident in 1922. The coroner's report was strangely terse, citing brain trauma without elaboration on the location of the accident. Something about it reeked of a cover-up. Back home, I scanned the documents and uploaded them to a secure cloud drive under a pseudonym. Next, I contacted a historian specializing in Prohibition-era crime, using an anonymously sent email. I described my great-grandfather's involvement in a rumored asset relocation scheme and attached copies of the ledger entries. Within 24 hours, the historian replied with an excited tone rarely found in academic correspondence. He pointed me to newspaper clippings from local papers in Montana that mentioned a mysterious warehouse fire in December 1922, conveniently overlooked in official records. The articles hinted at sensational rumors: arson, missing bodies, unclaimed insurance payouts. Every new piece of data deepened the pit in my stomach. My family's foundation donation was paid for with money siphoned from an insurance fraud that killed at least one man. According to a faded clipping, Northern Freight Coast warehouse burned to the ground 1 week after R.M. Mitchell's death, destroying all physical evidence of the illicit shipment. Meanwhile, my great-grandfather quietly rebranded his surviving textile plant and pocketed $20,000 from the insurance company. That sum, adjusted for inflation, became the seed money for the empire that still stands today. I found myself driving to the old Montana site, now overgrown by weeds and guarded by a defunct chain-link fence. In the damp chill of an autumn morning, I slipped under the rusted gate and walked the perimeter. What remained was nothing but a cracked foundation and a scattered handful of bricks. Using my scanner, I picked up a fragment of metal debris with a stamped serial number that matched a crate listed in the shipping manifest my parents had never disclosed. I photographed it and tucked the evidence into my backpack, legs shaking as if I'd committed a crime myself. That night, I confronted my mother at dinner. I watched her mask of politeness flicker when I casually mentioned the warehouse fire. Her eyes narrowed. My father cleared his throat and steered the conversation to safer ground. I saw the tremor in her hand when she lifted her glass of wine. She knew I was onto something. My heart throbbed like a warning bell in my ears. I retreated to my home office and assembled the files: the scanned courthouse documents, the historian's notes, the newspaper clippings, and my own photos from the Montana site. I traced a line from the stolen shipment all the way to the first donation my parents made to the town hospital. Every plaque bore their name. Every scholarship check carried their endorsement. Our family's entire reputation rested on a foundation soaked in blood money. Realizing the scope of the deception was like staring into an abyss. My great-grandfather had silenced Robert Mitchell. My grandfather had destroyed the freight logs. My parents had continued the lie, using the fortune to buy influence and respect, and I had accepted their fairy tale as my birthright. My daughter's dolls sat in her room, their chipped paint glowing under a nightlight, oblivious to the horror beneath our doorstep. The moral weight of silence pressed on me. Each new fact I uncovered felt like a nail driven into my own future. If I stayed quiet, I'd be complicit in a crime that spanned generations. If I spoke out, I would demolish my family's legacy and watch my parents, my mother who taught me kindness, my father who taught me honor, crumble under the weight of their own lies. By the time dawn broke again, my decision was made. I would unearth every last skeleton, document every hidden ledger, release every piece of incriminating evidence. The truth must emerge no matter how many lives it shattered. I closed my notebook, feeling the gravity of what lay ahead. I'd sever the ties that bound me to our gilded facade, and in doing so, I would free myself and everyone else from the cycle of deceit that had imprisoned us for a century. I waited until twilight, when the long shadows in the drawing room seemed to swallow sound. My parents were seated by the roaring fire as if expecting me. I held my breath, my hands trembling around the stack of documents in my lap. The photograph of my great-grandfather beside the loading dock lay on top, its faded hues more truthful than any portrait they'd ever commissioned. They looked up as I entered. My mother's lips curved into a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father set his glass of amber scotch on the table with deliberate calm. I closed the distance between us and placed the evidence on the coffee table, letting the papers flutter like wounded birds. "I've seen everything," I said. "The ledgers, the warehouse fire, the insurance claim, even the coroner's report." My mother's face lost its veneer of composure. She sighed, leaning back into the velvet wingback chair. "I suppose it was time," she murmured. My father rubbed his chin. "You've always had a talent for digging too deep." His voice was measured, almost admiring. I braced myself for their denial, for the righteous indignation I'd rehearsed in my mind, but it never came. Instead, my mother picked up the yellowed letter I'd found in the archives, the one warning of a loose thread. She read it slowly, as though tasting each word's treachery. Then she folded it and set it aside. "Yes," she said softly, "your great-grandfather had to make difficult choices. We all have. No dynasty is born from pure intentions." My chest tightened. "You've built your entire life on a murder and an insurance scam. You used stolen money to make donations, laundered blood money into our legacy." My voice cracked with betrayal. My father's eyes glinted. "Call it what you will, son. We call it prudence." I felt the room tilt. "Prudence? You silenced a man who knew too much. You burned a warehouse to destroy the truth. You murdered him." My mother shook her head, almost pitying me. "Murder is a strong word. Business has casualties." I stood, muscles coiled for flight or fight. This isn't business, it's a crime. My father leaned forward. Listen carefully, secrets like ours are the keystone of power. Without them, we'd be nothing but bankrupt charlatans. The world doesn't reward saints. He tapped the table. We did what had to be done. Their calm acceptance made my stomach churn. I realized then that the real crime wasn't the warehouse fire, it was the cold logic that justified it. My mother stood and walked to me. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch ice against my skin. You have your own life now, a wife, a child, a career you've built on the notion of honesty. Her smile was venomous. If you speak, everything you love will be destroyed. My heart thudded so loud I was sure they could hear it. You'll ruin me, I said. You'll tear my daughter away. You'll make my wife lose her job. You'll cut me off from any chance of redemption. They nodded as if confirming a schedule. My father's voice dropped to a whisper. We have friends in every institution, banks, law firms, the press. We can manufacture scandal, bankrupt you, isolate you. No one will ever hire a cardinal again. I swallowed against the acid in my throat. This was their true weapon, the power to erase me from the world. I remembered my daughter's laughter, my wife's gentle eyes. Is that what you want? I asked, voice shaking. My mother's gaze softened for a flicker of a second. We don't want to hurt your family, she said, but we will if we must. They had me cornered. Their threat wasn't idle. It was woven with calculated precision. I saw the glittering city lights through the window and realized that if I stayed silent, I would never be free of their shadow. Worse, I would be complicit in a lie so vast and so deadly it had claimed a man's life. I looked at my parents then, at the ruthless calm in their eyes, and knew there was no turning back. Their world thrived on this silence. If I remained, I would become another gear in their machine, another protector of the facade. If I spoke, I would shatter everything, including my own safety. I gathered the documents, feeling their weight as a promise of war. You gave me no choice, I said quietly. My father's smile was bitter but not surprised. You always said you had to be true to yourself, he murmured. My mother's eyes glistened, but there was no warmth. We tried to prepare you, we warned you. I nodded and walked away, leaving the drawing room and their threats behind. The echo of their words followed me down the marble hall. I knew the battle lines had been drawn. Their silence was a fortress, but my truth was dynamite, and I was ready to light the fuse. They moved with surgical precision. I should have seen it coming, but I was so hung up on their veiled threats I didn't notice the real blow landing until it was too late. It began the next morning when I arrived at my office to find an anonymous letter slipped under the door. My heart sank when I recognized the letterhead, the nonprofit where I'd spent years building programs for at-risk youth. The letter claimed I'd embezzled funds, produced counterfeit invoices, and directly siphoned donations into a secret account. My desk phone rang almost immediately. The director's voice was cold. We have to place you on administrative leave pending an investigation, she said. There was no time for protest. Within hours, my pride and reputation lay in tatters. News of the scandal spread faster than I could respond. I watched in stunned horror as colleagues who once praised my visionary leadership distanced themselves. Donors demanded refunds. The board convened emergency meetings. I offered to explain, to show them evidence that the allegations were fabricated. No one listened. Each new email that popped up in my inbox was another nail in my coffin. I told my wife what was happening, expecting her to rally beside me. Instead, I found her white-knuckled and terrified. The local newspaper had landed at our doorstep, a front-page story screaming with unsubstantiated claims about my betrayal of public trust. My wife read the headlines while our daughter clung to her leg. I thought she would hug me, shield me from the storm. Instead, she looked away. I don't know if I can handle this, she whispered, tears staining her cheeks. If you did it, what does that make us? That night I lay awake listening to my daughter breath in the next room, her small chest rising and falling like a wounded bird. I tried to calm myself by listing every honest choice I'd ever made, every hour I'd spent volunteering, every dollar I'd given out of my own pocket. But the questions my wife had asked echoed through my mind. Was there any proof left untouched? Had my parents set this up so perfectly that even I couldn't untangle it? The next blow came 2 days later when I got a call from my wife's workplace. The human resources manager apologized but said they'd received concerns about her association with me. According to them, her employer had been contacted by someone claiming she benefited from illicit funds tied to my nonprofit. The implication was clear. If she didn't resign immediately, they'd open a formal inquiry. Within an hour, she stood in our living room with her resignation letter in hand, her eyes hollow. I have to protect our daughter, she said. My world imploded. I stormed out of the house and drove to my parents' estate without thinking. I knocked on their door at midnight, adrenaline fueling every step. When they answered, I didn't wait for an invitation. I shoved the front page of the newspaper in my mother's face. Is this your doing? I demanded. Did you destroy everything I've built? They didn't flinch. My father folded his arms. My mother's expression was unreadable. "We warned you," she said, her voice deceptively gentle. "You threatened to expose us. We merely reminded you of the cost." She gestured to the darkened windows of the mansion behind her. "Your career, your marriage, those were collateral damage. We have to protect our legacy." I felt bile rise in my throat. "You turned your own grandson's family into refugees," I spat. My mother's eyes narrowed. "We gave you every chance to recant, to walk away. You chose war." My father stepped forward. "This is your fault. You crossed the line." I realized then that they had orchestrated every accusation, every smear, even the threat to my wife's livelihood. They used their network, lawyers, bankers, PR strategists, to tighten the noose around my life. They'd struck where I was most vulnerable, ensuring I'd be too broken to retaliate. But as I looked at them standing there under the cold moonlight, another feeling flared up inside me: righteous fury. They had destroyed my career, torn my family apart, wielded my daughter's future as a weapon. They had sealed their fate the moment they attacked the people I loved most. I took a step back, my hands trembling, my voice low and deadly calm. "You've made your move," I said, "but you haven't won." I turned and walked away, feeling the first real clarity I'd had since this nightmare began. I knew what I had to do next. They thought they could bury me by killing my reputation and threatening my wife. Instead, they forged the chain that would drag them into the light. As I drove home that night, the city lights blurred by tears and determination, I allowed myself one final vow. No matter how deep they'd sunk their claws, I would unearth every shred of proof, every hidden ledger, and every buried corpse of their secret past. They'd forced my hand. Now they would reap the whirlwind. I spent the next 3 days in a near catatonic state, moving only to fetch coffee and flip through my mountain of evidence. I cleared my home office, dragging in an extra table and setting up 2 laptops, a scanner, and piles of documents that looked like they could wallpaper an entire house. Every file, every photo, every scanned ledger and correspondence, nothing was left out. By dawn each morning, I was alone with the hum of my machines and the weight of what I was about to unleash. I started by organizing the evidence into 8 sections. Section 1 traced the origin of Northern Freight Co., including the incorporation papers naming R.M. Mitchell as president. I attached the coroner's report showing Mitchell's suspicious mining accident and the ledger entry marking the $20,000 withdrawal. Section 2 detailed the warehouse fire, newspaper clippings, insurance filings, and photos of the burned foundation I'd taken in Montana. Section 3 included the handwritten letter warning of blood on the spool and the brittle photograph of my gaunt great-grandfather at the dock. Section 4 cracked open the rebranding of my great-grandfather's textile mills, showing board minutes and tax documents funneling the insurance payout into what would become the family fortune. Section 5 mapped the money trail through trusts and shell companies, highlighting the phony donations that built our philanthropic facade. Section 6 exposed the continued cover-up, memos from my grandfather ordering the destruction of freight logs, letters between my parents and their PR firm crafting the family's self-made success narrative. Section 7 detailed the threats they leveled at me after I discovered the truth, including emails to my nonprofit's board and screenshots of the anonymous letters accusing me of embezzlement. Section 8 documented the sabotage of my wife's career, HR complaints, forged documents, and phone records tracing the calls back to entities tied to my parents' influence network. With every section meticulously annotated and timestamped, I compiled them into a 150-page PDF and backed it up on 3 separate encrypted drives. I created a detailed executive summary for quick review and a timeline that spanned a century of lies. I added sworn affidavits from the historian I'd contacted and a forensics expert who'd verified the serial number stamped on the freight debris. Late on a Friday evening, I composed an email to Veronica Chase, an investigative journalist at one of the nation's top newspapers. I chose her because she had a reputation for brutal accuracy and zero tolerance for being managed by her subjects. I addressed her at her personal email, one I discovered in a footnote of a byline, and laid out the offer: exclusive rights to a story that could topple a dynasty. I attached the executive summary, withheld the full PDF pending her verification, and wrote, "I have irrefutable evidence of a century-long conspiracy, murder, insurance fraud, and ongoing corruption at the highest levels of one of America's most powerful families. If you are willing to meet and verify, I will hand over everything. But I need assurance you will publish without compromise." I hit send and felt a momentary surge of relief, as if the gears of fate had begun to turn. Then I called my friend and lawyer, Marcus Avery, at midnight. He picked up groggy but alert. I told him everything: my findings, my parents' threats, the sabotage of my career and family. He listened in stunned silence before agreeing to represent me pro bono and to liaise with the journalist. He advised me to set up a meeting in a secure location and promised to arrange witnesses for the handoff of the drives. That weekend, I rented an office conference room in a discreet building downtown. I walked in alone, the black case containing my laptop and the drives in my hand. My pulse thundered so loud I thought the walls might shake. I set the case on the table, activated the recorder on my phone, and reviewed my notes one last time. Everything was indexed, every claim cross-referenced with original documents. My heart pounded not with fear but with an unexpected exhilaration. I was the architect of their ruin, and nothing could stop what I was about to do. The following Tuesday, Veronica Chase arrived right on schedule. She wore no makeup, carried only a leather satchel, and asked for no entourage. We shook hands and I slid the case across the table. "Here's everything," I said. Her eyes flicked to the executive summary. "I'll need to verify each section," she replied, "and I need to know you're protected." I handed her my phone with Marcus on speed dial and sent the folder of documents to her secure drive. She scanned the first few pages, then looked up at me. "This is explosive," she said quietly, her voice firm but tinged with something like awe. "If we publish, there's no going back." I nodded. "I've prepared for that." She closed her laptop and extended her hand. "Then let's make history." As I walked out of that room, I felt the last thread of my old life snap. My parents' fortress of silence was about to implode. I knew the fallout would be brutal. I would be forever estranged from the only family I'd ever known. But in that moment, I also felt a fierce liberation. I had chosen truth over safety, justice over legacy, and nothing would ever feel as empowering as the moment I pressed send on that email. The architect of ruin had set the plan in motion, and the walls of deception would come crashing down. I woke before sunrise to the sound of my phone buzzing like a swarm of angry bees. Blinking against the glare, I saw a string of notifications, alerts from news apps, emails marked urgent, text messages piling in faster than I could read. My heart hammered as I realized today was the day the world would learn the truth. I poured coffee with trembling hands and opened my laptop. The front page of every major news site flashed the headline, "Dynasty in Tatters, Blood Money, Murder, and Fraud at the Heart of the Cardinal Empire." Veronica Chase's byline ran across the top. My breath caught as I clicked through her exposé. She had spared nothing. The incorporation documents, the coroner's report, the warehouse fire, the insurance payout, the shell companies, the stolen funds funneled into hospitals and museums bearing my family's name. She even included excerpts from our recorded meeting, confirming I'd provided the evidence voluntarily. Within seconds, the story went viral. On social media, hashtags like Cardinal Scandal and Blood Money trended worldwide. Angry comments flooded every post featuring our foundation's logo. Overnight, the public monuments we'd funded were defaced with graffiti. TV news anchors replayed grainy footage of the Montana ruins and projected images of my great-grandfather's gaunt face. Morning talk shows debated whether our philanthropic donations should be returned, whether our family should face criminal charges. My phone rang, my parents' home number. I let it go to voicemail. Then my mother's cell, I silenced it. Then my father's office line, my chest tightened. I ignored them all, opened my messages, and found one from Veronica. "They're calling me, stay calm." I watched live coverage on cable news. Reporters had parked outside the Cardinal mansion, their cameras trained on the iron gates. A line of lawyers and bankers in dark suits emerged carrying boxes of files. News crawlers at the bottom of the screen announced a court order freezing all family assets pending federal investigation. The charitable foundations were suspended. The art galleries bearing our family name were closed for reassessment. Every bank account associated with us was sealed. The phone buzzed again, my wife. I answered, voice hoarse. "Are you okay?" she asked, tears in her voice. I told her I was alive. She said our daughter asked for me. I promised I'd be home soon. She said the school had barred her from attending because of safety concerns. My blood ran cold imagining my little girl, her world collapsing around her. Then the calls started coming for me. A federal prosecutor left a message. "Mr. Cardinal, we need you in D.C. for a deposition." An investigator from the IRS. "I have a subpoena for you." I stared at my phone, feeling both dread and relief. At least it was out in the open. My parents' frantic responses finally broke through. A text from my mother, "Please stop this, we can fix it." From my father, "You're making a terrible mistake. Retract your statements and we'll call it off." I deleted the messages, my finger hovering over the trash icon. On TV, pundits compared our family to historical robber barons. Opponents demanded criminal charges. Supporters of transparency praised my courage. I saw footage of protesters gathering outside the mansion chanting, "Justice for Robert Mitchell and return the people's money." The crowd held signs reading, "Cardinal lies kill and expose all corruption." I closed the laptop and sank into my chair, feeling the room spin. My phone blinked again, a news alert. Cardinal charity to return $50 million in donations. Another, family name stripped from hospital wing. The world I'd known, my heritage, my childhood home, the symbols of our pride were being dismantled before my eyes. Yet beneath the chaos, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, clarity. The fortress of lies had collapsed, and with it, my parents' stranglehold on me. I stood, brushed off my shirt, and looked at the stack of untouched documents on my desk, the rest of the evidence waiting to be released. I had more to reveal if needed, but for now I let the first wave crash over them. I dialed Veronica's number. She answered on the second ring. "It's everywhere," I said quietly. She laughed softly. "You did it." I left my office and walked into the crisp morning air. The city around me felt different, sharper, more real. I pressed send on a brief statement to the press. "I stand by the truth. I grieve for the innocent harmed by my family's deception. I will cooperate fully with authorities." As I walked home to my wife and daughter, I knew the days ahead would be filled with legal battles and public scrutiny. But I also knew I'd crossed the line that separated complicity from justice. The story had broken, the empire shattered, and in that nightmarish rupture I found a grim kind of freedom. I watched the news coverage for hours, even though every headline told the same story. The Cardinal name was toxic, our foundations dissolved, bank accounts seized, lawsuits lining up like vultures. My parents' mansion sat empty, its gates locked, whispers of criminal indictments swirling around their once revered legacy. They had built an empire on a bedrock of theft and violence, and now that foundation lay in rubble. Late that night, I sat on the edge of my daughter's bed while she slept, her small hand curled around her teddy bear. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and felt tears I'd held back all day seep out. I thought of my wife, working through the chaos of her own reputation, and of the friends and colleagues who never believed the smear campaign and had reached out with offers of support. Their kindness was a balm on the raw wounds of scandal. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the night light. I realized how heavy the lie had weighed on me, like chains I'd carried since childhood. Every family dinner, every public speech, every proud smile I'd worn was a page in someone else's story. Now those pages lay torn and scattered. My parents had lost the world they'd governed and manipulated with ruthless precision. But in their downfall, I sensed a kind of justice that echoed across decades of hidden crimes. I replayed the moment I decided to expose them, the click of send on Veronica's email, the handoff of the drives, the fear in my chest when I first saw the front page headline. I remembered the thrill too, the knowledge that I had chosen truth over comfort, integrity over inheritance. Even as my world trembled, I felt an unfamiliar lightness, as if I had shed a skin of obligation and dishonesty. In the days that followed, I met with investigators and attended hearings. I answered questions under oath, handed over documents, recounted every detail I had uncovered. My testimony was the keystone in a case that forced my parents into the harsh glare of accountability. I won't pretend it wasn't painful, reliving the story of R.M. Mitchell's disappearance, the warehouse fire, the cold calculation that had sustained a century of deceit. But each confession I made chipped away at the shadow they'd cast over me. Back home, I found my wife waiting at the front door, holding our daughter. She ran to me and hugged my legs, her small arms squeezing tight. I lifted her up and felt her head rest on my shoulder. My wife's eyes met mine, cautious but hopeful. "We're okay," she said. "We'll get through this." I nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. In that embrace, I felt our family's true legacy, love untainted by lies, resilience born from crisis. The next morning, I walked through the neighborhood park with my daughter, her laughter trailing behind us as we chased squirrels and counted ducks in the pond. I let myself breathe in the crisp air, feeling gratitude for the ordinary moments I'd once taken for granted. No more polished charity dinners, no more forced smiles under faded chandeliers. Just sunlit grass, the sound of birdsong, and my daughter's hand in mine. I thought of my parents again and felt no hatred, only a somber recognition that their ambition had consumed them. They'd sacrificed everything, what little dignity they had left, on the altar of a lie. In contrast, I felt an almost sacred freedom. Their ruin had severed the tie that bound me to a falsehood too cruel to endure. I was finally the author of my own life, writing each day in honest ink. In the weeks that followed, I received letters and emails from prosecutors, directors of charities, even ordinary citizens moved by the story. Some offered me work, roles as a consultant on nonprofit governance or speaking engagements on ethics. Others expressed sympathy, saying my sacrifice restored their faith in justice. I accepted a few of those invitations, wanting to use my experience to help others avoid the toxic grip of family secrets and unchallenged power. One afternoon, my wife and I sat on the porch swing after our daughter's nap. The sun warmed our faces. We talked about what we'd lost and what we'd gained. "I believe in you," she said, squeezing my hand. "I've always believed in you." In that moment, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. The storm had passed, and though the wreckage remained, I stood amid the debris with a clear vision of the future. I looked out over the yard where my daughter's sandbox waited, half filled with toys. I felt contentment in the simplest things: the promise of a new day, the laughter of a child, the integrity of a man who had chosen to stand for the truth. My family's gilded cage lay empty, its bars melted by the flames of revelation. And in its ashes, I found the space to breathe, to heal, and to rebuild a life where honesty was the only legacy I would ever need.